Ladies and gentlemen, coming soon, a podcast you've all been waiting for. The movie podcast to end all movie podcasts. A podcast that discusses and critiques the best of the best and the worst of the worst movies playing at a theater near you. With a host whose opinions have been deemed as fact by your favorite fact checkers. And that's a fact. Without further ado, let me introduce you to the movie maestro, the tyrant of theater, the gumshoe of review, the man that makes theater employees and Hollywood execs shiver by his mere presence. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge, the jury, the sultan of cinema, Justin Henson. Welcome to the Movie Wire.
Welcome to this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I'm your host, Justin Henson, and welcome to the show. We have a fantastic and wild show this week with 4 brand new reviews, 4 new in theaters, and 1 brand new for streaming. This week on the show, who needs heroes when you have thieves in the new fantasy adventure based on the popular game Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves? John Wick is back in the 4th installment to end things once and for all in John Wick Chapter 4. Based on a true story, an amateur historian goes on search for King Richard III's remains in The Lost King. And finally, a documentary surrounding the controversial pornographic website Pornhub. Don't act surprised, most of you have been there. In the Netflix original documentary, Money Shot, The Pornhub Story. Ready for my verdict? Let's get into it.
Out of the windows to watch a roar and a burst of flame. The Movie Wire podcast. You need people like me.
The Wire.
And here we go.
John Wick uncovers a path to defeating the High Table, but before he can earn his freedom, Wick must face off against a new enemy with powerful alliances across the globe that turn old friends into foes in John Wick Chapter 4.
Saying goodbyes?
Saying hello.
You think your wife can hear you?
No.
And why bother?
Maybe I'm wrong.
You're going to die.
Maybe not.
Goodbye to you, my trusted friend.
A new day is dawning. New ideas, new rules, new management.
We've known each other since we were 9 or 10.
Who is this?
The Marquis de Gramont. Challenge him to single combat. Win or lose, it's a way out.
I don't sit at the table.
Your family does.
Please pray for me. I was the black sheep of the family.
Man has to look his best when it's time to get married. Or buried.
I'm going to need a gun.
Goodbye, my friend, it's hard to die.
If you win, the table will honor its word. You'll have your freedom.
It's hard to die.
Under the old laws, only one can survive. Failure to meet at sunrise
It's hard to die.
will result in execution.
Last words, Winston?
Just have fun out there.
I want you to find your peace. But a good death only comes after a good life.
You and I left a good life behind a long time ago, my friend.
It's hard to die.
Now, me and the John Wick movies don't really get along when it comes to theatrical releases. I just want to share a curse that I have with the John Wick franchise that is still a mystery to me. Now, of course, as many of you know, I see a lot of movies, and most of those movies are in theaters. And there are times with busy scheduling that I tend to feel exhausted, but one thing in the lifetime of movies that I have been to, I can count maybe on one hand the number of movies that I have fallen asleep to. And the first 3 John Wick films have been 3 of those. And you're probably thinking, how can I possibly fall asleep to a John Wick movie or assume that I think they are bad movies? The answer is no, they are not bad movies at all. I actually like the John Wick movies. Well, 1 and 3 mostly. The only thing I can place my finger on is the subtle, soft-spoken performances, along with the subtle but yet in-your-face impressive action scenes that at times can seem to overstay their welcome in length. The John Wick movies seem like they are mainly tailored to Keanu Reeves to match his mellow but subtle persona and acting style. Now, the reason I bring this up, as I'm planning my week of movies for the show, I noticed the runtime of John Wick Chapter 4. It's like the filmmakers automatically knew my John Wick curse, at a runtime just shy of 3 hours. So I had to be very strategic on my viewing. I skipped the special pre-screening that started at 7 p.m. a week prior, thinking that would be too late, and I opted for a middle-of-the-day showing on a weekend with a big crowd, decided to view it at a favorite local non-chain Seattle theater with a charming vibe but oh so uncomfortable seats. And as I'm about to go in, I chug an energy drink prior to entering the show, along with purchasing one at the concession stand. And I am proud to say that I have broken the John Wick curse. I felt the sleepy vibe come across about the hour and 10-minute mark. Yes, I checked my watch when I felt the John Wick curse fall upon me, but that sleepy mood was briefly cut short due to a brilliant, engaging scene playing at the time. And thereafter, I felt myself engulfed into the movie. We could say it's the energy drinks or the uncomfortable seats, but I can safely say it wasn't just that. I was saved by a scene that wasn't action, but a very well-written, performed, and an audience-engaging scene. And from that point on, John Wick Chapter 4 had finally broken that curse. Now, this go-around, the film was directed by Chad Stahelski, which is an odd but risky choice to direct a successful finale to the John Wick franchise. His previous works included a lot of side jobs on action films such as The Matrix Resurrections and V for Vendetta, but his main expertise is a stuntman to stunt coordinator that I could do an entire episode on this man's expertise. From Escape from LA, Hunger Games 300, Orgasmo, 8mm to even uncredited stunt doubles for Brandon Lee in The Crow, Alien Resurrection, and a stunt double even for Keanu Reeves in the replacements The Matrix Reloaded and Constantine. Stahelski is a prime example of letting the experts of a genre with years of experience in acting and stunts to be behind the director's seat, to show moviegoers a true vision of action through the eyes to the man that has dedicated his career into creating an illusion of thrill. What Chad Stahelski does here with the 4th installment is not only give us the best choreographed fight scenes from the franchise, but it's the most well-shot installment to the series. It was a complete gamble the studio made with such a big responsibility, but the ending result is definitely a big payoff when it comes to a visual spectacle, but most importantly, substance to its action. John Wick Chapter 4 includes performances that you would expect from the previous films. The cast maintains that subtle but mysterious motives. The difference we feel is from the difference in the writing technique that we saw from the supporting cast being more of a dominant presence in support to John Wick versus contrasting the character that we started to see in John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum. Now, as we start to see a difference in the writing technique and a little bit more substance to the dialogue, that's because we had a new writer enter into the John Wick family, and that's writer Shay Hatton, and he comes back in John Wick Chapter 4 with alongside Michael Finch, whose previous works include 2017's American Sass and 2010's Predators and Hitman Agent 47. The first 2 John Wick films relied completely on the action and Keanu Reeves carrying the story, which can only carry so far. Even with going into the second John Wick, you can tell that the dialogue and story started to run out of steam by the end of the film. With John Wick Chapter 3 and now 4, you can see writer Hatton and Finch relieve some pressure from Wick's character and delegates a lot of that work into the rest of the supporting cast, which gives us a true ensemble feel and not just one man to root for and care about, but rather we have our attention and we care about multiple characters. The movie amplifies the supporting cast more so than we saw in previous installments, and it absolutely works here in terms of not banking on one character to have the audience root for, but multiple. It pulls our attention in to the point when a gun is pointed at an individual's head, there's concern for the character, and that's not just for John Wick. Hatton and Finch do a fantastic job on penning in such likable dialogue for our characters, there's really nobody that we root against on screen. This includes our main villain Marquise, played by the very talented Bill Skarsgård, that we just saw in Barbarian. Now, Skarsgård has to be a little careful at being so good with being the bad guy persona. With each villain he plays, he ensures to have a contrast to not make one of the same villain with every movie. It's really starting to show his range, but for one villainous role. From Pennywise from It, from Eternals to now John Wick Chapter 4. Skarsgård adds a high-class charm in John Wick Chapter 4 to give us a trusting but threatening performance. It does take a viewer a little bit of time to adjust to this contrasting threat, like having our eyes adjust to the light. But once we give into the character of Marquise, it's actually quite entertaining. Now, the biggest thing that we'll notice is how our visual cinematography and music support our cast. It's a beautifully shot movie, and the cinematography is spot on. When it comes to the visuals and fight scenes, there is an improvement here with the choreography of the fight scenes mixed with the action eye of director Stilinski. Even though in the previous installments, the action scenes were entertaining, but my problem was they tended to blend together with nothing to differentiate or separate them apart to really stand out. The film takes use of its surroundings to really give environments that are memorable, along with a huge improvement from the choreography in the fight scenes. But at times, Stilinski gets a little carried away, and his experience in stunts tend to bleed through the look what I can do factor. The fight scenes hits us with a bang and cool factor, but Stilinski doesn't know when to say, okay, that's enough, because the scenes tend to overstay their welcome and run way too long, where we tend to lose the engagement and attention to what's happening on screen. And this is what throws the pacing off just a tad, and takes a lot of the almost 3-hour runtime. We see a little bit of rushing in the ending, where we could have used a little bit more time to have the audience build some emotion before the credits rolled. John Wick Chapter 4 is a pleasant surprise given the 3-hour action film. Most of the success is due to Chad Stilinski's direction and the entire cast acting in unison with the well-written dialogue for a supporting cast from Shay Hatton and Michael Finch. The movie, of course, can overstay its welcome with the long runtime, but it's one of the better installments of the John Wick series that won't leave fans disappointed, but rather wanting more. I'm giving John Wick Chapter 4 3 stars. Now, before we get into the rest of the show, make sure you check out my reviews on previous episodes for movies that just became available to rent, buy, or stream now. Now available. After years of waiting, we go back to Pandora in the James Cameron sequel to the #1 box office smash of all time in Avatar: Way of the Water, which swimmed its way to 3 stars. There's no enemy like the past in the third installment to the Creed films in Creed 3, which took a hit at 2.5 stars. Woody Harrelson is ordered by the court to coach a basketball team with intellectual disabilities in Champions, which missed the basket at 2 stars. Special Agent Orson Fortune and his team of operatives recruit one of Hollywood's biggest movie stars to help on a secret mission. And it was mission accomplished at 3 stars. And finally, Apex Predator high on cocaine out of its mind in Cocaine Bear, which did enough lines and clawed its way to 3 stars. You can find those reviews on my previous episodes, and just a reminder, if you haven't yet, make sure you hit follow or subscribe and leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. And make sure you follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd at Movie Wire Show. Now, it's that time of year again where in the Seattle area we have the Snohomish Film Festival. You can now submit your film into the festival no matter where you're at by going to www.filmfreeway.com/Snohomish Film Festival. It's going to be a great year, and I cannot wait to see your movie. Now, I'm about to jump into the last set of reviews, but before I do, I want to briefly talk about a podcast that's become a big part of my weekly lunchtime routine. It's a podcast that's absolutely fantastic, and it's hilarious. By the end of each episode, they always put a smile on my face. And you know what? I'm going to do something a little bit different. Now, the show is rarely rated E for explicit, but this episode we had to given the content. So now that it's rated E, I don't really give a flying fuck. The podcast I'm talking about is J&K over the Fuck My Work Life podcast. Let's hear from those lovable funny fuckers now.
Is work getting you down? Or do you love your job but want to hear all about the other 98% of the population who don't? Then hop on over to your favorite podcast app and give the Fuck My Work Life podcast a listen.
Each week, J&K bring you a variety of workplace stories that will have you laughing even on your worst day. That's the Fuck My Work Life podcast.
An amateur historian defies the stodgy academic establishment in her efforts to find King Richard III's remains, which were lost over 500 years ago in The Lost King.
A horse! A horse! My kingdom for a horse!
Richard III. I just don't believe someone would be that wicked because of a disability. Doesn't ring true to me.
That's your critique of Shakespeare, is it? Doesn't ring true.
We both know you've had issues.
I suffer from chronic fatigue, and yet have I ever missed a deadline?
I thought it was time to give the younger ones a chance to shine.
Well, you want people who are good at being under 40, I will admit I am struggling there. But so are you.
Don't do anything impetuous, that's all I ask. We need your wages too.
Bye, Mom. Bye, Mom. Bye. Do you have any books on Richard III, the King?
I know who you mean. We have 8 titles.
I'll take them.
Which ones?
All of them.
You haven't answered our calls. You haven't answered our texts. What have you been doing?
You must be the Richard III Society. I'd like to join. I'd like to visit his grave.
There isn't one.
His mortal remains are lost to history.
I know I can find him.
It's starting to sound slightly mad.
If you could just understand the way it's made me feel. I feel energized. I feel happy. I know you're some sort of apparition. I've been trying to work out why you're here. I wonder if it's because you're lost.
How can you possibly find him on your own?
Finding a needle in a haystack would be easier.
This is starting to look a bit like an unhealthy obsession.
Plenty have tried to find him and failed.
I know you haven't been in work for the last 2 weeks.
Can you tell me what that letter represents?
Just means reserved.
Course. I believe this is a very important historical site.
This is the equivalent of someone with a homemade rocket saying they're going to reach the moon.
You can't stop now.
Have faith in your research. Have faith in yourself.
I'm worried I won't find you.
Don't let them push you around. Stay strong.
I'm here today to tell you a story about a person who is judged unfairly in life and never given the opportunity to show their true potential. You don't happen to know where you are, do you? Might help.
Based on a true story and book, The Search for Richard III by Jeff Pope tells the tale of a peculiar story of Philippa Langley, played by the lovely Sally Hawkins, who is an amateur historian who battled the odds to search for the remains of King Richard III. Now, based on, inspired by, usually are made to not only inform its audience, but to usually more commonly tells the tale to inspire and motivate its audiences. Now, this is a first for me. After viewing the film, I went home to research this true story. And the research that I did, I was more inspired than the actual film itself. But just because it doesn't follow the same normal based on inspired by true story film formula of story, teach, cry, inspire, doesn't mean it's a failure of a film. The Lost King is actually an interesting tale, sweet, innocent, and at times can be a little too subtle for its own good, especially with our cast. Now, Philippa, played again by Sally Hawkins, who is absolutely superb in this movie. Philippa is a complex character whose world feels like to the audience that the world is crumbling around her. Her husband, John, played by Steve Coogan, walked out on Philippa, but is frequently over at the house because of their 2 sons, Rafe and Max, played by Benjamin Scallon and Adam Robb. Husband John is usually over the house either cooking dinner, doing small talk, or taking the boys out to a movie, but then advertises to Philippa that he always has to leave due to a date. And this has to be hard on Philippa. Not only that, but Philippa also suffers from an ME disease, a chronic fatigue disease that not only does she have to strive through, but is constantly judged from her co-workers and bosses who blame everything she does on this disease. The Lost King doesn't really show examples of this, it just mere mentions it. The film has more of a focus on the inform of the story versus the people. The movie never really goes deep into the character discovery of the individuals, but rather gives the audience casual summaries. This is where the movie's intent becomes clear that it wants to tell the tale of the story rather than the people that were involved. Even when we surround our main character Philippa, we see throughout the story her lack of confidence, but a burst of emotional confidence when she starts talking about King Richard III. We see a nice progression of Philippa's character that stays really down to earth and believable, and that is thanks to the remarkable performance of Sally Hawkins, who is in top form here. As the film rolled on, I began to appreciate the laser focus from the filmmakers on not steering off course from the mission of the film to give focus on the end game of Philippa's mission by focusing on her struggles, but rather the thing that drives her to move forward. In a way, this is a subtle inspiration of things that drive us, and it's a refreshing telling of a true story, where the filmmakers and writers aren't spoon-feeding us subplots and forced emotional pit stops. Where I was less forgiving was the development of the supporting cast and the progression of their character development, more specifically from Philippa's husband John, who comes across as a real unlikable jerk, and by the time we get to the climax, it feels like an unearned redemption. And we see another example to a historian at a university that plays a big part in the movie, Richard Buckley, played by Mark Addy, who goes from jerk to jerk to jerk to a subtle attempt at an unearned redemption. The movie doesn't progress these characters well enough, and it doesn't really place a bow by the end of the movie. It tries to set up these characters to likable by just a certain brief spot of dialogue towards the climax. These two characters, even though interesting to watch along the journey of finding Richard III, their on-screen likability by actors is there, but their dialogue is not, which ends to a roller coaster of unbalanced likability and dislikability. It will leave most people disappointed by the climax, wanting more, and we are wanting more not just for our curiosity of their individual characters, but for Philippa, so we can give some closure to this character. The Lost King gives a toned-down Da Vinci Code type of feeling while watching Philippa investigate and follow the path to Richard III, in which I would have loved to see more of the research attempt to lead Philippa to where the location of where King Richard was being held. And we have these inserted scenes with an imaginary King Richard III that Philippa has conversations with, that only she can see. And this happens throughout the film, and at times it feels a little unnecessary, and it really doesn't add anything to the story other than giving a visual appearance of King Richard. It would have been a better focus and a lot more interesting of giving the audience more of Philippa's research. Now, there is a scene with this imaginary King Richard towards the climax that I really did enjoy, but I think if they would have left that in, it would have been a bigger impact. By limiting a lot of the scenes and having that King Richard vision towards the end would have acted more like a trophy for Philippa, and I think it would have added a little bit more emotional impact to it. The Lost King is an interesting story, and there is a lot to this story that the film doesn't cover, but rather give readers a Reader's Digest summary of the true events. It's a completely respectable attempt at focusing on story versus character, but at times it has trouble balancing the two to give audiences what they came for. It is subtly inspirational in its own special way, and it's an innocent film. It's one of those movies that as you're walking out with whoever you go with and try to search for something to say about it, but you can't. You just walk in silence because there's really nothing that stands out that's memorable other than it's a true story. So as you're walking out of the theater in silence, trying to find something to say, but the only thing that's going to come out of your mouth is, it was just all right. And then after that, it's not going to be a discussion. You're going to ask the person next to you if they're hungry and want to grab a bite to eat, and that's the end of the movie discussion that you just spent 2 hours of your time with. I'm giving The Lost King 2.5 stars. A charming thief and a band of unlikely adventurers embark on an epic quest to retrieve a lost relic. But things go dangerously astray when they run afoul of the people in Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves.
Here's the thing. We're a team of thieves. And when you do this, you're bound to make enemies. Sometimes those enemies come looking for revenge. Truth be told, we helped the wrong person steal the wrong thing. We didn't mean to unleash the greatest evil the world has ever known. But we're gonna fix it.
So how do we pull that off? Figure it out over a drink?
Probably best.
You need coolness!
To give us a fighting chance, we're gonna need strength. You got this, right?
I know you don't.
We also need courage, magic, and you. What is that again? It's an owl bear.
Let's go!
Be warned. There is evil here.
I'm glad he's on our side.
This one's dangerous. But whatever happens, we'll be ready.
exactly that you bring to this?
I'm a planner. I make plans.
You've already made the plan, so...
If the existing plan fails, I make a new plan.
So you make plans that fail?
No.
He also plays the lute.
Not relevant.
Back in the year 2000, there was an attempt at a Dungeons & Dragons movie with a director and writers with little to no experience that also had Justin Whalen from the Superman show Lois and Clark as well as Marlon Wayans. Now with that said, I don't feel the need to explain why or how this movie bombed so bad not only at the box office but with audiences, to the point we have this wildly popular license and it took studios 23 years later to release another attempt at it. Now here is my upfront and honest moment with material like this, is that I know nothing about Dungeons & Dragons. I haven't even attempted a game, and the only thing I have to compare it to is the 2000 film version. Dungeons & Dragons has never been my cup of tea, but I know the love that many have with this property and the game. I will state that where the first attempt at this film adaptation failed is that it took itself too seriously. It appealed at just a specific fan base that are totally going to go in and judge this movie based on their own individual experiences. And this is where Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves gets a lot right, which is using the fact that this is a game as a foundation. And when we sit down and play a game, we're usually with a group of friends and it's intended to be fun. The movie was written and directed by John Francis Daley, who some will know from playing Lance off the TV show Bones, also who helped write Spider-Man Homecoming and 2015's Vacation. Alongside Daley is Jonathan Goldstein, who helped write Spider-Man Homecoming and also writing and directing Vacation, with a story by Michael Helio. These filmmakers know exactly what they wanted to create and the tone that they wanted to go after. They took a smart approach not only to the appeal to Dungeons & Dragons crowd, but a wider range of audiences. Goldstein and Daley are smart in their strategy here. Included in the smart decisions, the film is pretty well cast, starring Chris Pine, Michelle Rodriguez, Reg-Jean Page, and Justice Smith as Engin, Holga, Zank, and Simon. A group of four, each with a unique skill from strength to spells to swordmanship. And then we have Chris Pine, the Mouth. Our four main characters all have an on-screen likability, and you can tell they have some fun with the material. But this is where I feel the progressed chemistry between them doesn't really grow as fast as the movie is playing. With each one having a unique skill, this can add a lot to the dynamic. Well, almost everyone. Because again, we have Chris Pine. As individuals, they all deliver their lines just fine, but the dialogue between them seems to almost have an awkward this is our first date kind of feel to it, and it never really grows from that with the exception of some conversations here and there. And as I say they deliver their lines just fine, I should mention we then have Chris Pine. Now, I know I haven't really mentioned Chris Pine a lot so far in this review, so let me give him some attention here. Chris Pine has had a roller coaster of a career after appearing in 2009 Star Trek, picking some very unusual roles, with some respectable moments here and there. And I'm not saying that Chris Pine does a bad job here, but his portrayal of the character almost mimics his performance that we saw in Star Trek. And I get it's hard to get past that character that everybody sees him in, but his performances does not help with that vision, where every other line he seems to say something sarcastic in a Chris Pine sort of way. It's very hard to tell a difference from each character he plays from each of his movies because he attempts to play the same character in every movie. This one included. This isn't a film that Pine attempts to show off his range as a performer. He plays it way too safe, and this affects it in the way we look at the lack of chemistry between our four leads. Pine does have some good lines and moments, and I wouldn't go so far to saying that he was completely miscast, but while watching Honor Among Thieves going into the second half, his performance was starting to bother me when I started to notice the dynamic between the other cast members was being held back, as almost feeling like his co-stars were told not to outperform Chris Pine. Now, the biggest surprise to this cast was the rambunctious Hugh Grant, who plays Forge, a thief, a previous friend, and colleague to Pine and Rodriguez's characters. After an event in the beginning of the film, Pine and Rodriguez's character, Engin and Holga, get sent to jail, leaving Edgin's daughter, Kira, played by Chloe Coleman, in the hands of Forge, who raises her in Edgin's absence. Hugh Grant has played some very colorful villains in the last few years, from Paddington 2, The Gentleman, more recently Operation Fortune, that I just reviewed, and now comes his most fun performance yet. Hugh Grant has definitely zeroed in on his forte at this stage of his life and acting career to really turn the villain role into something memorable, to the point every time I see him cast as a villain, I have to smile. Now, with how complicated the Dungeons & Dragons game looks to me, the cast and filmmakers make the concept look like a walk in the park by keeping it light, bright, with laser line pacing to keep the eyes glued on the screen. It keeps the story simplistic enough to keep the vast audience entertained and knows exactly what it wants to be, which is never taking taking itself too seriously, and it is smart by doing so. When it comes to the fan base of Dungeons & Dragons, I can't speak to that, but I think we can all agree, fan or not, that this was a vast improvement, an atomic bomb of improvement from the 2000 version. So I will present that to all the fans of D&D that are listening. The film does have its flaws that can add up to a little bit of a pile. I would have loved to see more lore of the Red Witches and the creatures that the film presents. And did I mention Chris Pine? But that doesn't stop it from being an enjoyable ride. Dungeons & Dragons Among Thieves, I was dreading and dragging my feet to get into the theater, but after the credits rolled, I was dragging my feet to leave because I wanted more. This has no reason to be as good as it is as pure fun theater-going entertainment that requires a large popcorn with extra butter to view. I never thought I would be entertained by watching anything in regards to Dungeons & Dragons, and yet here I am, about to say it was a fun ride at the movies. Will this make me want to seek out and play Dungeons & Dragons? The answer is no, absolutely not, but after watching Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, I wouldn't mind a sequel or continuation of the story as long as they keep it as much fun as this one. I'm giving Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves 3 stars. It's so hard to keep track and even have time to read all the trending topics on the web. Now there's a new app to help with all of those problems. Newsly is an audio app for iOS and Android. It picks up web articles about the most trending topics on the web at any given moment and reads them to you in a natural human voice. For the first time in the history of the internet, the entire web becomes listenable. Browse articles from topics you choose and start playing. You can follow any topic as specific as you like, from sports, science, to Bitcoin. You can even follow Kardashian. It will find you the latest articles and read them to you out loud. And guess what? They have podcasts as well. Explore trending podcasts from over 50 countries. The Movie Wire is now a featured podcast on the Newsly app. Download and use Newsly for free now. The link will be in the description of this episode. You can also use one of my promo codes that you will find in the description as well to get you a 1-month free premium subscription. Stop scrolling, start listening, download Newsly today. Now, even though this is a film review, this review does cover a movie that is more adult in nature. There is language, adult themes, and some things that might be a little inappropriate for younger kids. So if you have young children in the room or car, wherever you're listening, and you're not ready to have that uncomfortable conversation with your youngsters, this is a chance to tune off and listen at a later time. With that said, let's jump right into it. In the new Netflix original documentary follows the rise of the most famous adult entertainment platform and the recent backlash it has received in Money Shot, the Pornhub story.
Do you remember the first porn you ever saw?
It was at a sleepover, and at like 2 a.m. something special came on.
And I'm like, 2 women can do that?
An 8-person geriatric.
I mean, anything can be porn.
Every element of the internet has been influenced and led by pornography.
In 2008, Pornhub was omnipresent.
It's pretty much a household name. Like, I know what Kellogg's brand is.
People assume I'm doing mainstream porn. In reality, I'm just in my room by myself making little videos.
Most traffic website in the world, conservatively.
This is a company that does exactly what Facebook does. It's a data harvesting operation.
Some people don't like that these things are not in the shadows.
Knowingly profiting from sex trafficking is what we believe they're liable for.
The more I explored, the more aghast I became. I found too many cases of kids whose worst moments were preserved in amber.
I was pretty reliant on what management was willing to say about it. All we were told was none of it's true.
This industry is going to get cleaned up.
They neglect to see that sex work and sex trafficking are two completely different things.
Sex workers in general were deplatformed across the internet.
72% of us lost our income.
If it wasn't for porn, I probably wouldn't be alive.
It's not just an attack on porn, it's an attack on people being able to express themselves.
And the people who get left in the dust are porn performers.
Let's just get this out of the way from the start. If you see the words Pornhub and Money Shot on Netflix and are expecting a provocative, taboo, porn-invested documentary, I'm sorry to tell you that you will be greatly disappointed. Now, this film will be viewed non-biased, but as a mere observation of the filmmaker's thesis execution, commentary points, supported facts, and conclusion of the point of our documentarian. The new Netflix original documentary deep dives into the company itself from its origin to the controversial middle to where it stands today. Money Shot was directed by Suzanne Hillinger, who directed 2020's Totally Under Control, which was an in-depth look at how the United States government handled the response to the COVID-19 outbreak during the early months of the pandemic. And there is a lot of Hillinger stamps that you can see on both of these documentaries. Suzanne Hillinger definitely has a passion on the topic she chooses, and I give her credit for allowing the viewer to see those passions. But this can also be her weakness in documentaries. Suzanne Hillinger presents her information as we see somebody crescendo their anger from a topic as the movie goes on, and loses perspective from both sides. And she just focuses on repetitive facts as she's giving a history lesson. And it comes across as a documentary ran and we lose perspectives from both sides. And this can affect the pacing and also the credibility of her messaging. Now, one of the biggest points of watching a documentary is walking away with learning something new. Hillinger covers topics on underage kids being leaked on Pornhub, web security, legal processes, what happens when a video gets uploaded, what steps the company takes, brief discoveries of a few select porn industry workers, and the why. Why do they do what they do? And the big question is, did I take anything away from watching Money Shot? The answer is yes. I learned what a lube shooter was. How that will affect me going into the future? It won't. I was taken back at the practical effects that these videos use, that it almost ruins how I view these videos that I've never watched on a website that I've never been on before. I always knew something didn't look right on these videos that I've never watched on this website that I've never been on. And the key tool was a lube shooter. But the most we gained from Money Shot, the Pornhub story, was mostly from the first half of the documentary, where we see most of our screen time with the porn industry workers. Here we have the most interesting look into what millions of people tune in each and every day to see. Now, whether you agree with this profession or not, listening to the reasoning, the background of how they started, and a behind-the-scenes look gives a human element to this documentary. Will it change the view of how you see or saw the industry before? No, but you will take away some new insight of what you hear. But sadly, Hillinger's focus on this aspect of information is brief because the human element to what our industry workers say doesn't support her narrative that we see in the second half of the documentary, which is when we lose the human element and we just go by just the facts, ma'am, in a series of interviews from the same select few people. I love that Hillinger covers topics especially for the sex trafficking, non-consensual, and the minors appearing on Pornhub. These are absolutely important topics that deserve a documentary, but surrounding it around just one single porn site doesn't really prove any points. That's not to say there isn't anything here, it's just not really shown or outed or shocking in the documentary that a lot of people aren't already aware of. The sex industry had been well known to have these issues. There isn't anything shocking in Money Shot that shouts, "Wow, that's a surprise to me." But instead we get the same interviews, the same people that work for the company, that work for the government, that work for a nonprofit. They say the same things over and over again, and it gets redundant and the messaging gets lost in translation. Now, Hillinger doesn't hesitate to call out the company itself on everything it's doing or not doing to provide porn videos to the public that we all know hundreds of millions of people view around the world each and every day, and the bare minimum and limited things it's doing to limit the illegal content that gets uploaded to the site. She points out everything this company is doing at bare minimum. And of course they are. They're in a business of making money from people logging on to watch sex videos. This isn't a company out there to solve world hunger or stop global warming. They are making money off of sex. Does that make it morally right? No, of course not. But this is the common sense that Hillinger tries to convince otherwise. Do I agree with this format? Absolutely not. But Hillinger's point to this documentary is to bring it to light and show us something new. And this is where it is not executed properly. She doesn't take her documentary and filmmaking skills that we saw from her previous work of Totally Under Control and include what current laws and government actions are being done so companies like this can have the set of expectations to get companies like this under a set of standards. This would have been a better topic and a chance to get more people interviewed to make her point clear. Illegal sex videos are bad, we get it, yes, but tell us something more we don't already know. Hillinger adds a petition topic against Pornhub, but the vague follow-up to the result has limited ex-employees that say they are doing the bare minimum. She adds a lot of outside sources to say they're not, but we have just a couple ex-employees telling us they are doing the bare minimum. To me, it would have been a bigger shocker to have more ex-employees come under camera. How realistic that was in her filmmaking I can't say, but the balance between the interviews are way off. We see more people on the outside of the company than we do on the inside of the company giving their opinions with very little facts. Money Shot doesn't reach out to a lot of the voices of Pornhub, but a select couple, with more of the same few that speak against it, which doesn't blow Hillinger's commentary out of the water, but feels rather repetitive of actions from the same people that she interviews outside of the Pornhub staff. This is where Hillinger comes across as a rant versus a documentarian, when she covers just the topics that bugs her, and I get it, going directly after an online company that targets sexual urges seems like a great vehicle to get your messaging across, but you can't rely on just a big company and just throw some facts at an audience. I felt rather set back that as a documentarian that covered politics in her prior film, that she doesn't add more concrete statistics from what the government has in place to protect the public for the covered topics. There is very little in Money Shot, a Pornhub story, to get Hillinger's message across. It is the same small group of people split up through the entire movie without anything that keeps the viewer engaged. But the biggest eye-opener that our director discovers is the amount of people that Pornhub has overseeing thousands of video uploads each day. And that was an eye-opener, but again, it's a business in the sex industry that works on a set of standards that is only required to them. And how we miss that as a bigger topic of a documentary instead of just targeting one person is beyond me. How many people would you ask and say, hey, Pornhub isn't going above and beyond its standards that are required, you better not watch any videos on there? And then your friend goes, okay, I guess you're right, Stan. I will go to another sexually driven website that probably has next to no standards set in place because it's not the biggest porn site in the public's eye. There is a bigger topic here for a documentary, and Suzanne Hillinger's focus on Pornhub is not it. By the end of the documentary, it's hard to take away anything that I didn't already know. Here's what I knew before the film. People watch porn. There's illegal things that happen in the sex industry. The company is not only going to do what is expected at bare minimum to maximize profits. We are not talking about Nordstrom here surrounding customer service. I'm pretty sure Pornhub's customers are satisfied after a few minutes of shopping. But I will give Suzanne Hillinger credit is that she does provide a couple interviews with people that work in the porn industry. It's very limited screen time, but at least she adds it there, and it's done very respectable, without any sort of sex shaming or disrespecting. She doesn't try and manipulate the narrative to feed her vision and her messaging by using our sex industry workers as examples. She keeps it very real, and that's the biggest thing in this movie that I actually liked. It's one of the things that added a human element to this movie. But right when we get in past that, we take away the human element. We're just getting numbers, spreadsheets, corporate executives, government, and there's no human element to it. When we have the people of the porn industry getting interviewed, it adds that real human element to the documentary, but then it gets into nothing but facts without personality, heart, or anything other than what feels like a timeshare presentation. This was a missed opportunity for the topic of non-consensual sex, minors on sex sites, and overall illegal activity across all platforms, not just one. Why Suzanne Hillinger targeted Pornhub? Because it's the biggest, but little knowledge was gained with targeting one thing. Money Shot, the Pornhub story, adds very little substance and very little knowledge, and it rides the back of common sense to the audience. If you're looking for a documentary about Pornhub to see some naughty things, you are going to be greatly disappointed. If you're looking for a documentary to learn something about Pornhub, you'll be greatly disappointed. I'm giving Money Shot, the Pornhub story, 1.5 stars. And that's a cut on this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I want to thank you for listening and thank you for your support. You can also show support by following me on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd at Movie Wire Show. And don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcast. Until next week, do me a favor, make sure you stay for after the credits to show the respect to those that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making a feature film, and support your local movie theaters.
A verdict has been made on this episode of The Movie Wire by your host, Justin Henson. He thanks you for listening to the show. You can follow Justin on Instagram and Twitter at Movie Wire Show, or visit his website, www.themoviewire.com. Oh, and don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we will see you at the movies.
Thank you for bringing me to the movies.